me. My name is Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditties. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys. Miss Liz back in the house. That's right. And today I have two men in the house. That's right. I get to sit with two guys. On Tuesday, I got to sit with two amazing women, and today I get to sit with two amazing men. So today I have Trevor W. Harrison in the house, and we're going to be talking about his book and a lot of other things that we're going to bring to the table. But today his tea is global holistic rational. So that's the tea we're serving in the house. We do not serve a beverage in this house. We serve storytelling and all of that good stuff. But before we get started, we're going to get you over to Miss Liz's YouTube channel, Spotify, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of those platforms, and just give them quick subscribe, follow, and shares, because each of these tea times, I guarantee, will make a difference with somebody today. So let's get started with the disclaimer for Miss Liz. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicated to sharing real-life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. Miss Liz is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guest viewers and participants are responsible for using their own judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of discussions, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at my email at bookingmissliz@gmail.com, or visit my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. Miss Liz welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect those wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Now let me give you a little bit on Trevor. Well, today at the table, I have the pleasure of pouring a cup with Trevor W. Harrison, a respected voice in political, socialist, public policies, and the human side of research. Trevor is a professor emeritus of sociology at the University of Lethbridge, a former director of Parkland Institute, and the author and editor of 11 books, including one of poetry. His work explores how politics and policies shape our everyday lives, and how stories behind the statistics tell us who we are as a society. So pour your cup, take a seat, and join us as we journey from policy to poetry, finding the voices of humanity that often go unheard. Let me get Trevor in here and let's spill some tea together. Welcome, Trevor. You twisted my tongue a little bit there.
Well, I have to watch that. I have to drop it. No 4-syllable, maybe not even 3-syllable words in there. But yeah, it comes out of my academic background, so you still do those kind of things. Well, it's great to be here. Been really looking forward to talking with you. So we can start whenever. I know you have some great questions for me today.
I do. I have a full lineup of questions for you, Trevor. But I'd like to get into who Trevor was as a little guy and who's Trevor now.
Who is Trevor's little guy? Well, I think one of the words I used to describe me was curious. I was always very energetic. I'm not sure how my parents actually put up with that. Um, and I was curious about just about everything. I remember my mom actually taking myself and my older brother to a library and just bringing back books on every subject from, of course, kids love dinosaurs, but ships and history and you name it, all kinds of stuff. And poring over that sort of thing. And so I think that sort of described me fairly energetic and interested in a lot of different things. And that has continued throughout my life, I think, in terms of wanting to put things together in a way that makes sense for me.
Well, you brought up dinosaurs, so we're going to go down that rabbit hole of dinosaurs. What is it about dinosaurs, Trevor?
What is it? Well, every kid loves the thing that, first of all, I think it's the size. And of course, we don't actually know how dinosaurs actually sound. But all kinds of movies have them making these big roars, right? And so kids say, "Hey, that's really amazing. Listen to that." So I think it's the sheer size, and also you don't see a dinosaur every day. So the very fact that here's something that roamed around here millions of years ago, I think that's kind of the allure of it. These monsters that are out there, and on the other hand, can even seem a little bit friendly, at least the way Hollywood sometimes depicts them or cartoons. So how can you really be angry with a big roaring dinosaur when he's kind of cute?
Yeah, right? Especially Littlefoot.
Exactly.
For all the little listeners out there, Littlefoot. Yes, Miss Liz watches Littlefoot with my little granddaughter. So, um, and you see, this is how we do it on Tea Time. We just have some fun, and I'd like to know you as a younger version to the older version. What got you into the writing, Trevor?
We always had wonderful picture books around the house on geography, place around the world, history, and everything else. But I wasn't only looking at the pictures, I started reading, and I started reading some fairly heavy duty stuff, actually, even when I was 10, 11, 12. I was very interested at the time in history and about war. So I would read all kinds of things about the First, Second World Wars and other battles. And but at some point, it clicked with me that I think I could write too. I'd like to be a writer. And so from probably some time in my teens, whenever in our classroom, the teacher would assign these things like write a little short story or something. Well, I was the kid that the teacher would inevitably say, "Oh, we're going to read what Trevor wrote here." And so, which is a real ego boost. So again, you kind of get this positive feedback for whatever it is that you're writing. And so by the time I was 15, 16, I would be scribbling away. I was writing poetry. It's probably really bad, but I was writing away on, little short stories and poetry. And I always thought I would be a writer. Although interesting enough, I was thinking more of kind of a literary writer, like a Graham Greene or somebody like that. But once I got into academia, which is its own peculiar form of writing, so for a long time I also wrote a lot of academic tomes as well. But I always had in the back of my mind that I wanted to do other kinds of writing too. So now that I'm retired, I've sort of returned to that. So I'm actually at the moment finishing editing a couple of books of poetry, and I have another book actually coming out about kind of a memoir of traveling along what was known as the hippie trail many years ago through Asia. So I've sort of been freed from writing necessarily academic stuff, and I still am interested in some of that, but I've kind of spread my wings to explore different kinds of writing at this point. So that's kind of how it came about, but it was a very early on kind of thing that I really thought, for whatever reason, writing was important to me.
Trevor, you mentioned, you said a word that I haven't heard before, the academic writing.
Yeah, like the sort of writing you do in the academy when you're a professor, when you're working at a university or college. And so part of what you are expected to do, depends what field you're in, but is to produce kind of research that is defensible as independent research. So did a lot of that sort of thing on all kinds of public policies, politics, analyzing politics, not only nationally but internationally. And so that was kind of the writing I did. And I never quite lost, though, the idea that you can mix literary writing with academic writing. And so, because I used to also read a good deal of poetry, quite often I would somewhere, if I needed a catchy phrase, slip in some line from some poem someplace, famous or otherwise. And I just found it was a nice way of blending styles of writing between what is a very formalized sort of writing versus more free-flowing individualistic kind of writing that that poets and other people can write.
So, Trevor, I want to bring up a book that Mickey sent to me, and I want to talk about that book a little bit. So, I'm going to
Yeah.
bring it up, and then for my audio listeners who are not watching the video, if you could describe the cover of it and the history behind the image.
Well,
I know a little bit because I've done my homework, but for my listeners out there, I want them to understand a little bit.
well, here, I'm actually going to hold it up here. Now, of course, it's kind of a reverse thing, I suspect, up on the screen, but it's called Tales This Side of the Elysian Field. So one of the first things actually that people asked me, and I did a couple of book launches. It came out late this last year, so it's really a 2025 book. But a lot of people ask me, well, what are the Elysian Fields? And so basically the Elysian Fields is the place where warriors in ancient Greece, when they died, or, we have these sort of myths around the world, where warriors would die and they go off to kind of a heaven. So there they would, end up having, if they're men, of course, lots of women, but lots of wine and good food and everything. It was kind of their reward in the afterlife. So it was a good place to go to. And so when I said that I wrote a lot actually in my teens, and one of my high school teachers, I was not a great student, I have to admit. One of my teachers, though, commented in a report card once that I didn't seem to be paying as much attention as I should. My mind seemed to wander the Elysian Fields. Now, I thought, so that was a wonderful allusion for the title of the book. However, the Elysian Fields, as I said, was a place where warriors went after they had died. And so that's why I appended Tales This Side of the Elysian Fields, because I'm not dead yet, and hopefully will be around writing for a little while longer. So that's something to do with the title. I should say something also just about the cover. The cover is actually from a photo of a family reunion going back some 20 years or so. But I took a picture with my camera, and I always thought it was a really interesting, just the pose of a person who happened to be actually a niece of mine sitting on a dock. And so I have a friend who has recently, in the last few years, taken up painting, and she asks for photos that she can paint, just partly practicing, but she also sells some of them. And I thought, hey, I could send her this. And by the way, this would make a great cover for the book. So I'm really pleased that a good friend of mine, Colleen Bacher, who is the artist, was able to paint this picture and that we could use it on the cover of the book. So there's a lot of things come together in both the title and the cover itself.
I really like the cover. Like the cover is really peaceful for me.
Mm,
It's like looking onto the water, right? The reflection of happiness and the sky, the calmness of the. When I did my homework on the book, Trevor, I was just like, oh, so it was a painting. Ah.
yeah. Well, and actually, I have the painting actually is hanging in our house. So we got it from Colleen afterwards. I like the scene too, the peacefulness of that, and I also like the sort of the here and looking further out. So it's this side of the Elysian Fields, and then you're looking out away where the Elysian Fields would be, right? So I thought in the imagery was really quite perfect, and so that's why I wanted this for a cover.
Whichever, I want to get into the Writers Union. I'm going to pull up the website. So if anybody would like to know more about Trevor, they can find Trevor here on the Writers Union. How did you get a part of the Writers Union?
Uh, I, you know, I before I retired as an academic, and I still belong to a couple of associations like the Sociological Association of Canada, Political Science Association, belonged to the American Sociological Association for some years. So I'm a joiner. I joined a lot of things. But then once I started to become doing a different kind of writing, then I thought, well, I should connect with and know something about people who are literary writers, poets, whatever. And so I joined it because I support the idea that writers are really important, and I think they deserve to be supported. And so I've only belonged to a couple of associations for a year and a half or so now, but it's been very rewarding. I'm really pleased to be connected with other writers.
So what got you into the Canadian Society? Because I noticed when I looked at your about you, Trevor, you have a lot of books that are about the Canadian Society. So what got you into that?
Well, that's a particular area of sociological and political science research in Canada. And so a lot of my work started out just talking about politics generally, but uh, the idea of talking about what is Canada, why is Canada, a topic that is very hot right now in the news all the time, and so I ended up I wrote I think a fairly good textbook on the subject that ran to 4 editions, and I don't know if it's still being used because I don't know how often the course is being taught, but it was really enjoyable for me because we're talking here about stories, and every society is also made up of stories that people tell about themselves, myths that people believe about who they are. So the United States has myths about its founding, how it started, who Americans are. Britain is the same, France, every country, Russia. So, but as a Canadian, I explored and was learning things as I wrote the textbooks, parts about Canada and the stories about Canadians going back hundreds of years that I hadn't known. So it was kind of an eye opener for me to discover things about my own country and to bring those forwards to students so they understood this is where Canada is now. How did we get here? Right? And it didn't just suddenly emerge. And when you were born, it was already formed to a large extent. Constitutions, political practices, language, rules, etc., etc. So how did this come about? So part of those textbooks was always about exploring how is we got to where we are. And to some extent, with the kind of work, the kind of writing I do now, except at a slightly different level, it's also looking at stories. What are the stories people tell about themselves and each other? And where did those stories come from? When someone comes to you and says, I have a story to tell about myself, well, how did that story emerge? What was your experience that led you to tell this story? So, in some ways, the writing looks different, but at base, it's actually in some ways pretty similar. It's about telling stories about people.
And Trevor, what do you find is most interesting about telling stories?
I like the way that people frame the stories, but I also like there's the story that people tell, but there's the story that they also could have told. So what is the story that is kind of absent here, right? Why is it? And tragically, sometimes people are stuck on a particular story about themselves or their community or their society, and nothing will dislodge them from the story that they believe. It becomes so entrenched. So, and yet it's always possible that people can tell different stories about, they could have their stories challenged to actually think about, does your story really fit the evidence? Are there other people living close to you who might tell a very different story, right? So that again is I think it's a literary thing. It's very much an academic thing. Is trying to deal with the competing stories that people tell about themselves, and why is it that people become particularly entrenched in believing one story as opposed to the possibility of other ones. And there's all kinds of writers we can think of who actually engage in doing that kind of almost unearthing the stories that got buried and no one actually brought up.
I like that
It's
you said
interesting.
that, right, Trevor?
Yeah,
I like the challenge your story, right?
yeah,
Why do
yeah,
you want to tell that story? Why do you want to get it out there, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That in itself is, why is the story so important to you that you need that? It's not just a need, but it's a compelling need. You have to get that story out, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we have almost 8 billion people on this planet. To my mind, everybody actually has a really interesting story. They don't realize they have a really interesting story. And so in kind of popular culture, what we tend to get is we get stories from people who seem really heroic, uh, you know, generals, politicians, or, rock stars or athletes or something like that. I'm interested also in those stories of the unsung heroes, the unsung people who have stories that they themselves don't realize are really compelling. I'm on Facebook, and almost every day there's some story comes across to me of somebody I'm saying, why didn't I ever hear this person before?
Right?
They did something amazing. They discovered some cure for something, or they did something incredibly courageous to rescue a family or something. I didn't know about them. Why doesn't everyone know about them?
Yeah. And we were talking about that before we went live, right? Is
Mm,
why don't we know stuff? And that's why Mickey sends me you guys over here so I can get to know stuff and I can learn from you guys. Uh, because I didn't have the education that most people got. Uh, you know, so when I have these intelligent conversations and educational conversations, it really intrigues me, and it makes me want to go down the rabbit hole and know a little bit more and understand a little bit more because I didn't have that chance to learn, but now I can learn as an adult, right?
mhm, mhm.
There's no age limit of not learning.
Exactly. And actually, I said before, being curious as when I was young, and again, that's curiosity about people's stories. But what we actually do know is that people who remain kind of curious and engaged, thinking about things, tend to actually live longer and be healthier. So it's a really good thing. You don't have to stop learning at 30. Lots of times people actually, in fact, increase their learning abilities as they age, and that's a good, healthy thing to do.
So, Trevor, I want to ask you, as a professor, what do you feel is lacking in the educational systems in today's world?
Oh, that's really tough. And I said before, I tend to think of things holistically. So I think sometimes, and it's legitimate to criticize educational institutions for some things, but I think we often forget that there's a whole universe outside of that. And so I think a lot of times people who come into not just to university or college, but even come into earlier grades, um, are surrounded by a popular culture that is actually kind of anti-educational, anti-intellectual. It's all about playing games, and it's almost infantilizes people forever. So they're not serious people growing up, and I have been surprised actually at the university level though how many students would come to my classroom and not know simple basic facts of history or about, again, how their society operates. Uh, and it's not that somebody failed them before that. I mean, again, high school or whatever, they should have been learning some of that. But it's that our culture itself is not conducive to learning. It's all about just entertainment. And so I think there's a whole context in which public schools and then colleges and universities are left to have to pick up the pieces or fill in the blanks of things that many of us years ago would have just kind of learned by living in a society that was engaged in learning. So I think that's the first thing. There's other things, of course, going on. I mean, I think we need to fund all education much better than we do. We're actually having a teachers strike here in the province I live in, and it's a serious one. I mean, the underfunding of we have lots of money to build sports stadiums, but we don't seem to have money for teachers or assistants, and so that's part of it. The other one down the road am concerned about actually is what is AI actually going to do to education. And it will be very easy for people to just copy something, believe they actually have something that's factually correct, when in fact it could be quite wrong. And AI has just sort of manufactured this thing, and you tend to believe that because a computer has provided it, it must be true. Well, it's not true. I can give you actually a wonderful example of that, by the way, very shortly, if you want to hear.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, the precursor for AI, and it's part of it, is Chat GPT. So a colleague of mine, about 3 years ago, we began kind of toying with this and asking questions of Chat, to see what they could produce for us, an answer to something. So I actually punched in my own biography, I asked the question, who is Trevor Harrison? And it came back, and it got a couple of things right, but it got a lot of things really wrong. For one thing, it said where I got my degrees was totally wrong. It said I got them out of Western University in Ontario. But beyond that, it also went on to say, and it gave titles. It said I had written a couple of books, and it actually gave titles to the books. Never heard of them. Not true. So all of a sudden, I'm the author of 2 books that AI or chat said I actually had produced. And this is not the first time. Lots of people have expressed some real reservations. So what people forget about AI and all these systems is they imagine that the computer itself has actually has come up with this, that it's actually made the information, that it's made the facts. No, what's happened is some human being or human beings have inputted information into this universe of data, and all the computer actually does is it scans the universe of data and spits out an answer. So if the information put into the machine is wrong, it'll be wrong that comes out. But there's a worse part of this, 2 worse parts. One is that the sheer weight of bad answers will have a tendency to drive out the good. So for example, if there's 1 correct answer to something out of 10, but there's 9 that are absolutely wrong, the weight of those wrong ones will eliminate any attention to the right one. So because it will scan the universe of just bad stuff. The other thing is, as I just mentioned actually before, is I think we actually have a tendency to believe that because it comes out of a computer, we default to that and say it must be right. But we do forget that human beings have put it in, and human beings could actually be intentionally manipulating the data so that you get wrong stuff. So that's actually pretty scary to my mind.
I am so glad that you're bringing that up, Trevor, because I had a guest back in season three, and she works with NASA, and she said that we AI is used there for one purpose, and that's to question it. It's not to take it for its value, the
Yeah,
answer. Question it. If it
yeah.
gives you an answer, question it. Why did it give you that answer? Where did it get that information? We got into a society where we just AI says it and it's true.
Yeah. No,
I look at AI as my second husband, and I argue with that thing back and I'm like, no, that is not correct. That is not what I asked you. That is not what I want to hear. Dig deeper. Go down another rabbit hole if you want to, but we have to question the AI. It's there for help, but it's
mhm.
not there to do all the work.
Yeah, I know. I think you've nailed it exactly, Liz. So it could be a helpful thing in looking at, but what we need is, and again, this gets back to the education systems, and it's getting harder and harder to do it, but we keep talking about wanting to create critical listeners, critical learners who can actually understand and evaluate the information that comes at them. And if we could do that, then you could see through the falsehoods of AI. But if we don't do that, then there's going to be a tendency on the part of a lot of people to just accept what AI spews out there. So we keep talking about it, universities, creating critical thinkers, but I fear we're going to get swamped by AI. And again, there's lots of people don't mind the idea of having uh, bad information flood the universe.
There's so much misinformation that it is destroying and dividing
It is.
societies.
Yeah. Yeah. It pits people against each other because this is the other thing, of course, living in, so I said I write about Canadian society. Canadian society is actually really complex, when you get down to it. We have the second largest landmass in the world, but we have 41 million people. So we're really spread out. Uh, it's very easy for people in one side of the country to be pitted against another because the fact is, in a lifetime, you're never going to meet everybody, right? We are held together, and it's the same for the United States and other countries. Uh, the term actually came up years ago. A famous sociologist, again, Benedict Anderson, said, the imagined community. We belong to an imagined community as a nation. We we can know we can meet people around us. We might meet people in our city, a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that we're sort of connected to that we can only imagine who they are. We will never meet them. And yet we feel that we're part of a community called the United States, or a community called Britain, or a community called France or Canada. So this is somewhat on faith. And what holds it together is the information that allows us to imagine that somebody, Joe, who lives in thousands of miles away, is kind of like you. You have a connection to Joe, even though you'll never meet them. But if the information about Joe is wrong, or is saying that Joe is really out to slit your throat or something, that he's a really bad person, then it's very easy for that imagined community to start to fall apart, right? People all of a sudden become pitted against each other. So communication and information about each other is more important than ever. I mean, take it to the level of the globe. How many wars and conflicts do you see because people in different parts of the world have an imagination of who living in some other country, who they are and what they're doing to them, right? So this is one of the pitfalls of modern globalization. We never had to deal with this a little more than 150 years ago, but we really have to deal with it now.
Well, Trevor, I want to get back into the writing. You went into poetry. What got you into poetry? Like you went from policies to social,
Oh,
the society, and then the poetry. What got you into the poetry?
I think what I liked the sound of words. I think that
Oh,
was it. There's like the phraseology of the way poets would write. They somehow captured my imagination. That a a lyricism about the way really good poets would write. So the other thing, as I got into writing more and more, and here becomes a kind of a blend again with doing more academic kind of writing. Um, Ezra Pound, who had a troubled background himself politically, but Ezra Pound was a famous editor as well as a poet. And in fact, he is really responsible for T.S. Eliot's Wasteland. He was a really good editor. And what was good about him, he had a great phrase about what writing should be. He said, poetry should be uh, white as bone and hard as stone. And what he meant by that is it should be clear and concise. So you don't want all kinds of sloppy intrusions. If you have something to say, just say it. Don't don't prettify it. Don't throw in a whole bunch of articles. Get the sequence of the words right, and make sure it's really clear and concise for the reader. And so that was his dictum for writing good poetry. But I have to say it's also stayed with me in terms of doing other kinds of writing as well. So that if I was writing an academic paper on something, I found myself quite often and the best editors, you need to edit your own work, I think. So, you really have to work at it. But I would think to myself, is that sentence is as clear and concise as I want it to be? What do I need to take out of here? And the the art of good writing is editing, right? Write big, write everything you wanted to say, and then sit down and be your own most brutal editor and say, how can I shrink this and get it down to its most perfect point of the idea that I want here? And I think whatever kind of writing you're doing, whether you're writing short stories or a large book or academic tomes or poetry, it's treating language with respect, saying that words matter, and the precise word matters here. In the English language, you have tens of thousands of words, and sometimes you have like 10 words that seem to mean the same thing. Your task, I used to tell my students, your task is to pick the right word, right? Not the second best or the third best. What's the one word you really want?
And don't
And
go to Chat GPT for the answer.
I don't know. Exactly not. Exactly not.
I found something when I did some research on you, Trevor, and it says a magic train of thought when writing, editing too soon.
Yeah, I think, like I said, write big, because sometimes what you want to write about is a fairly big idea. And so if you cut it off too soon and you start to edit it down, you're left with a kind of bereft, shrunken version of the idea that you were really aiming for. So it is important to let your creative juices just kind of go at first, and and just let it go there. And sometimes you have to go back and say, oh, what did I miss here? So of course, I still work on paper sometimes because it's a lot easier, and I'll have little arrows going around saying, move this here, move that there, stick that in there, or whatever. And, and then you go back again, and, so several iterations of it. But finally you say, okay, I think I've got the gist of it down. Now I do that next hard thing of kind of the editing part again. But yeah, you can cut things off a little too early, I think, in terms of ideas.
Well, I think that's why we all should have a rough draft, right? We
Yeah.
create the rough draft first, and don't worry about the mistakes, the edits, and all that. Just have fun. Just write. Just let it
Yeah.
flow, and then go in, because then you're taking some really good stuff out. If you're just like, oh well, that doesn't rhyme, that doesn't match, that doesn't, you're taking away from the purpose of the whole writing experience.
Yeah. Well, if there's something you think is really exceptionally good, but it doesn't happen to fit in what you're doing, I mean, sometimes the story requires that you stick with it, but there's another kind of little story there. Put it in a box someplace, knowing that you can always come back again later, because that one paragraph was dynamite, and I just don't want to lose it. So I'm going to park it for a little while here. There is an interesting thing about writing nowadays, I think, is going to be a problem down the road for people who actually study the whole process of writing, and that is the computer. It used to be, if you go back to looking at the manuscripts of people years ago writing something, and you see all these little scrawls in the margin, or you'll find endless kind of drafts to get to a certain point. Most people who work on a computer now, when you're doing your versions, you tend to, unless there's some reason you have to go back, you tend to take over, just replace with another version, right? So I think for scholars down the road who want to know, what was the process by which Liz got to where she went, right? They're not going to have that, because they're not going to have all this box of manuscripts seeing how you got from part A.
Nobody wants my box.
Well, a shoebox.
It's a big treasure trunk box, Trevor. I'm a keeper, man. Like, I write and I got keynotes all over, and I'm just like messages all over. I got files on people that, we could have some good stories to tell in the future.
Yeah. No, I do fear that some of this is going to be lost. And in terms of like students learning the whole process by which someone actually produces something, we could be losing some of that stuff. But yeah, we'll see.
Right? Everybody's got a box, but Miss Liz has got a treasure trunk. I don't like small boxes. I like big boxes. Even my kids are like, Mom, you keep everything. And I'm just like, you never know what story can come out of that little piece of paper or that little sticker or little candy ornament that I got from a little kid that, walking down the street, they give me a rock. I don't know. I'm a magnet for that, Trevor. Little kids will come up to me and they'll give me a rock or something, and I don't even know the kid. And I'm just like, I'm going to put that in my treasure trunk. Like, they felt safe enough to give me a rock, or they gave me a sticker, or gave me a candy. Like, I was just like, okay, well, let's just hold on to it.
And it's a very, very endearing thing to do. So you don't want to hurt their feelings. And so you take it, and after a while, your windowsill is just full of rocks, but
Yeah, my treasure trunk, my kids have said no more, Mom. I'm just like, okay, I got it. But I got grandkids now, so I need another treasure trunk.
Yeah.
So Trevor, I want to get into your tea before we wrap up. And you gave me global, holistic, rational. Tell me why those 3 words.
Yeah, part of it I think I've already explained is the holistic part. So I don't, when I'm thinking about a story or I'm analyzing why somebody does something or groups of people do something, I don't want to just look at narrowly at something. I want to see all the parts of this, how it came together. So it would be like a doctor treating some kind of illness, and so they focus on one symptom, but they miss out on all the other symptoms, right? So that's the holistic part. Global is, in terms of, again, somewhat related, is that, we do live in a global world. I like traveling. Many of the stories actually in the book are about travels when I was younger. And I still continue to travel. Last year, actually, I did a trip to Southeast Asia. First time been there. Went with my son, who is a wonderful traveler too. So we had a great time, and we're actually planning another trip to go to Vietnam in November for a little over a month or so. Sort of backpacking around and seeing things. So I love the idea of travel again. It's meeting different people, seeing different things, hearing different stories. I just find it incredibly exciting to do that. The rational part is I have an emotional part too. I can certainly get caught up in things. I don't think anybody is totally either rational or irrational or emotional. But there is a part of me that, again, I want to understand, why do you think the way you do, even against the best evidence? And so I will even check myself as, why am I believing something? So I think I'm a fairly rational thinker in the kind of enlightenment sense of things fit together. I want to know how they fit together and why. And I don't want to believe just in mythologies. I want to understand how, what is the evidence behind something. And that's part of sort of my academic background, I guess. So those three things, there's probably other parts to me as well, but I think those three words probably describe me reasonably well.
I like it because it's a nice strong cup of tea. It brings people together. It unifies your tea. Each of the words connect and bring you on a journey. And you mentioned that you're traveling to Vietnam.
Yeah, last year when we made our trip, we actually only just landed in Hanoi, but so that was the only part of Vietnam we saw. Fascinating, wonderful people. But we then went on uh, to Cambodia and Thailand for another few weeks. But I thought there's a lot I didn't see and didn't get to know about Vietnam. So this time I think we're going to stick in Vietnam and start in Hanoi and then work our way down through Hue and Da Nang and end up in Ho Chi Minh City. Lots to see. I'm really quite excited about the whole venture. And yeah, so that's tentatively the plan. Hopefully, sometime in around November 10th, heading out of Canada for there.
Oh, so you're traveling in the wintertime. You're
Well,
getting away from the snow.
yeah. Oh, escaping. Yeah, that's definitely part of the idea here. Yeah. Although actually we're having a very mild fall here. I think it's abnormally warm here in this part of Canada. But it's the best time actually to travel to Vietnam because it's outside of the rainy season.
Okay.
So you escape some of the. I mean, it can be rainy in some parts, but for the most part, the rainy season is done. So November, December is pretty good to travel. And then the hordes of tourists start to arrive after that because they also want to escape the snow.
See, as Canadians, we're all running from the snow. But this year, like where I am in Canada, Trevor, as well, it's really mild. Like I sat outside and had a coffee this afternoon with no jacket on. I was just like, we're mid October here. Like, where's the snow? And I come from a northern Ontario town where I
Oh,
am, but now I'm living in down, I guess to consider it the south, down
I,
by Ottawa, right?
I
Uh,
should have asked you before. Where is it you live?
I'm in Cornwall, but I'm originally
Oh,
from Hearst,
wow.
Ontario. So I'm used to the cold and the snow, and
Yeah,
I'm all mixed up. Like we usually have snow this time of year.
yeah.
Uh,
My
so
my my wife's brother actually lives in Cornwall.
oh
So
well, small
yeah,
world.
yeah, small world. But no, you're right. This year in Canada is very a little bit disturbing, actually. What does it mean for the future? But here in Western Canada, it's becoming very, very dry. We're just not getting a lot. And of course, you see it in the forest fires and all those concerns and drought. But
Yeah.
but for now, we'll take it. We'll sit outside, sip a glass of wine, and use the barbecue well into probably October, November. So yeah.
Well, a couple of years ago, what I had steak and baked potato for Christmas Day because I was just like, you know what? It was too nice. There was green grass. It confused the heck out of me.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is this is not the normal course of events. As Canadians, this is very
We
weird.
don't have steak on Christmas. We have turkey, but that year I was just like, you know what? This whole Christmas is just odd. There's green grass outside. I'm having a steak and baked potato.
Yeah, yeah. So
I have a question here for you, Trevor. If your memoir had a theme song, what would it be?
oh, Um, uh, Actually, it's a very interesting question because I actually have thought about designing my funeral, and I have about 8 or 10 songs I want played, and I've actually joked that I'd love to be there in person to listen to it because it'll be a great concert. Now I will be there, but I just won't be hearing it. But there's a song, and I'm trying to think. The name of the band will come back to me, but the song is "Young and Restless." Running out of control. Anyway, that's it. I'm trying to think of the band. Oh,
Put
it's a
it in
Canadian
Chat
band.
GPT.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think there was I said back to always being really energetic, and I mean I knew I also, besides writing, wanted to travel around the world when I was like, well, even when I was 10, I used to look at maps of the world. So I think Young and Restless has kind of epitomized my life.
I bet
May
you
not
that's
be
the name.
quite so
I bet
young
you that's the
anymore, but
name of the song too, Trevor. Young and
pardon?
Restless. Uh, okay, I have another question here for you, Trevor. It's our one hysterical figure you'd love to have a debate with over coffee.
Oh, historical figure. Again, it almost inevitably has to be a writer of some sort. I think actually George Orwell would be really interesting to talk to. Um,
Oh,
but as a historical figure, kind of like one of those famous people there, maybe Lawrence of Arabia. I think he would be actually kind of interesting. Yeah.
why?
I, just that whole adventure thing and the Middle East and turmoil, and yeah, I think he'd be an interesting character. But so many people like that. But for the most part, when I think about people I'd want to interview, my mind usually goes to writers and artists. Actually, I think
Hmm.
I find artists really really interesting. So uh, different way of looking at the world from me, but I'd love to sit down and talk with Picasso or Michelangelo or Da Vinci or people like this. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And that's where I like to go down the rabbit holes. I like to find out a little bit more about my guests. Uh, Trevor, a book not your own that changed how you see politics or society.
Oh, wow. Hmm. There's a book actually it came out in 1946 and made a bit of a splash and then sort of disappeared, but for the last 25 years has suddenly reemerged, and a lot of people are looking at it for to explain the world we live in. And it's a book by a gentleman by the name of Carl Polanyi, Polanyi. Carl Polanyi is called The Great Transformation. And he to summarize it in about 25 words or less, what Polanyi says is that the chaos of the 20th century, the two world wars and the Great Depression, arose out of efforts to have unregulated global capitalist markets, and that it set in motion a conflict between various groups and classes. And like I said, it actually disappeared for a period of time, and now it's really come back to prominence again as partial explanation of kind of the world we live in now. So I think that would be up there among the books. Uh,
I've never heard of that one. I'm gonna have to check that one out.
there's another absolutely great one that comes to mind too that touches on something we were saying earlier. Book by a guy named an educator by the name of Neil Postman. He sadly died a few years back. Neil Postman wrote a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And he sort of talks about the decline of kind of intelligent debate where instead people are just entertained endlessly, kind of the Romans bred in circuses, and not taking seriously the issues we really have to deal with right now. Inequality, global warming, war, the next pandemic. There's a lot of big things coming down the road. And Postman, if he was still alive, would say, yeah, but all we want to talk about is, the latest album by Swift, or what's happening in hockey or football or something. So yeah, it's an intriguing book that way. It makes you think about the world differently.
And, Trevor, you're a professor in a university. Do they still have clean debates in the universities?
Uh, not so much actual debates one on one. I wish we did actually. I think that would be really healthy, as long as they were civil and sensible and not just
Well,
screaming.
that's what I mean, like clean debates, right? Because we had
Yeah,
so many people saying debate is it's back and forth, right? You're wrong, you're right,
yeah,
we're not
yeah.
having
That's
that clean debate anymore.
yeah. That's not debate. That's kind of like something out of Monty Python. Uh, but no, they. But there is actually lots of presentations where usually after the presentation there is good discussion goes on. People will ask the whoever gave the talk some good hard questions about why did you say this, what do you think, etc., etc. I actually still give, even though I'm retired, I give a lot of public lectures on all kinds of things here, and I get regularly interviewed by media about what is going on too. So I don't mind doing that. And but yeah, universities still it is a place for holding those kinds of discussions.
Yeah, I wish they would bring it back, without you're wrong, you're right, it's more about the performance and likes and loves now, you know,
Right.
and it's really changing our society where we can't even have a conversation without division anymore.
Yeah, I think you're right. You really nailed something there. It's about performance. And so one of the bad things is about modern media is a lot of people don't actually read the text of a discussion. So what they do is they watch the performers, and the performers kind of engage in a kind of gotcha kind of thing. And and so they don't try to answer each other's points. Whereas a proper debate shouldn't just be somebody emotionally saying, well, you're wrong. Well, if I'm wrong, point out the evidence for it. Let's at least agree that we can find some kind of evidence one way or another, and we can look at it objectively. But unfortunately, a lot of what purports to be those kind of debates on television, whether it's Fox or CNN or anything else, ends up not being they're talking past each other,
Yeah.
but they're talking past each other for a reason, because they don't want to engage in the discussion. They want to score political points, and I just find that incredibly annoying.
Yeah, the avoidance of evidence.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hey, Trevor, what are your final words to all the listeners today out there?
Well, be critical. Think about where you get your information from, but also find happiness in whatever you're doing. Whatever you are doing, try to be good at it. Try to keep learning. I think that's really important, and try to make connections with other people. In a world that is increasingly disconnected, try to connect more and find out what are the stories that are driving people out there. And I think you'll find a much more fulfilling life if you do that.
Well, it was a pleasure sitting with you and getting some good information out there to all the listeners out there. And if anybody's watching the recap and something you want an answer to a question that Trevor can answer, you can reach out to Miss Liz, and Miss Liz will get that out to Trevor, and Trevor can get those answers out to us. We want to have these conversations, and we want to keep these doors open, because that's what makes the difference on Tea Time, is getting good information out there, good education out there, and opening up some doors through an open conversation like we had today. So I just want to do a closing up of what we did today. So today's Tea Time with Trevor Harrison was a beautiful reminder that every policy carries a human heartbeat and every story deserves to be heard. Trevor showed us that research isn't just about numbers, it's about people, resilience, and truth. As we close this tea time, may we remember to look beyond the headlines and see that humanity that binds us all together. Until next time, keep pouring kindness, keep seeking truth, and keep planting those seeds of change. And I will see you guys all at 7 p.m. with another guest, and we'll do this all over again.